All right, seems like we can go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Really happy to see everyone who's joining us through Facebook. My name is Nikhil Sadharangani. I am the Secretary of the East Brunswick Human Relations Council. The Human Relations Council is a council appointed by Mayor Cohen, and we look to promote diversity, tolerance, and acceptance in East Brunswick through events just like this one. Our Coffee and Conversation series was meant as a way to bring community members together and discuss, topics of diversity, tolerance, and acceptance. Tonight, our event is Bridging the Gap, a discussion of equity and equality in the classroom and the workforce. And we have a wonderful panel here tonight set to discuss those topics as it relates to women's equality in education and, the professional environment. So before we go ahead and get started, keep in mind that we have a set of pre-prepared questions, but also we'll be taking questions through Facebook. It's possible we do not get through them all, so please do keep that in mind if you do submit a question. I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves, starting with Holly, and then Holly, if you could pass it along to each subsequent panelist to let them introduce themselves as well. And if each of you could talk about your educational background as well as your professional background, that would be great. So Holly, take it away.
My name is Holly Cerami. I'm a member of the Human Relations Council. I'm also chair of the East Brunswick Clergy Council, and I serve on other committees in East Brunswick. I went to Brooklyn College and studied accounting, which I then decided not to pursue, and then went to design school at Parsons and studied design, which I did for a short time, but actually ended up having most of my career be in the garment center. Then I was a stay-at-home mom for years. After that, I became a manager in a dental office for part-time for years and years, and now I am pretty much retired and do mostly volunteer work. Erin, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Holly. Hi, everybody. My name is Erum Shakir. I am the chair of the East Brunswick Human Relations Council. I've been in the town for about 20 years. I double majored in psychology and HR from Rutgers University, but I'm in finance technology. A little bit about how I got into finance technology. At that time, my husband was in IT, and he was very enthusiastic about IT. So I took some certifications, certain courses, and now I'm a project manager at Bank of America in finance technology. I'd like to now pass it to Nancy.
I served on the town council for 9 years. I was in the assembly for 7 years, and I was on the health committee. I served as chair of the environmental committee. I was on law and public safety, and I was on a special program on sexual assault, and also on minority procurement, veterans procurement study commission. And I transitioned in January to the county clerk. And in that area, we're working on elections and the right to vote, which is so crucial, and also, the other duties of the clerk. And am I passing it to Sasha?
Hi everyone.
Okay.
Thanks for having me. I'm Sasha. I'm currently a student at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, and I'm studying political science. Right now I'm doing administrative stuff for the East Brunswick Regional Chamber of Commerce. And I recently just finished an internship at the Small Business Administration in Washington, D.C. And I specifically was working at the Office of Women's Business Ownership, which helps female business owners across the country and prospective business owners across the country find resources to help them either maintain their business or build a business from the ground up.
Great. And Devi, if you'd like to introduce yourself, she'll be taking our questions from Facebook.
Hi, everyone. My name is Devi. With time limitation, we'll try and get to all the questions as much as we can. About me, I am the member of East Brunswick Human Relations Council. I have a big diverse background. We have a newborn now, my second child, she's 7 months old. And my home right now, I just work from home full time with a newborn here and a 9-year-old. Time is just flying by too fast. All right, that's it for now.
Great. So now that we've spoken to all our panelists, before we get into the pre-prepared questions, we're just going to go over a brief overview of kind of what the topic is here tonight. And mainly that's the disparity we see between men and women in education as well as professional environments. So for our universities here in New Jersey, women were not allowed to attend Princeton University until 1969 in a co-ed fashion, and Rutgers until 1970. There is, of course, the wage gap that has made headlines for years. Women currently make 80 cents to every dollar that a man makes, and this disparity grows with women of color, with Black women making 66 cents to that $1, and Hispanic women making 58 cents to that $1. Women currently make up 27% of workers in STEM fields, and they make on average 19% less as their salary when they work in such fields. They currently make up 34% of lawyers and 36% of doctors, still well below kind of 50-50 that we would expect. One sign of progress is that more women do now have college degrees than men, and this has been the case for the past 7 years. So clearly, obviously, we have made progress since the middle of the 20th century, but there are still a ways to go before we achieve the equity that we'd like to see, both in academics and the workforce. So let's get started with our first question for our panelists tonight. And again, to the panelists, if you just want to go ahead and raise your hand if you want to be the first one to answer the question, and I'll be able to see you and hand over the floor. So growing up, what were your family's expectations around higher education or a professional career? And how did their expectations impact your outlook as a young woman? Erin, go ahead and get started.
Sounds good. So my parents didn't really have like huge expectations from me. If I wanted to be a doctor or if I wanted to be a lawyer, they were down for everything. So we didn't really have that growing up. But I know that in my mom's generation, there was like an expectation that, you're going to be home, you're going to be with the kids, you're going to be like a stay-at-home mom. But I personally never had that type of expectation from my parents. They kind of wanted us to do whatever we chose to, and which was really nice because, we had seen movies and we had seen our parents kind of at least my mom to kind of take a back seat. And I was really happy that my parents gave me that opportunity and that openness that I can just kind of go and do whatever I wanted to. So that was kind of nice.
Mm-hmm. And then I think Sasha wanted to jump in as well.
Yeah. So my father and his family actually, they're immigrants from Soviet Russia. So when they came here, the opportunities that they had there are not even close to what we have here today. So, he never had high expectations, but he definitely wanted me to take any opportunity that was given. And, I grew up valuing hard work and work ethic. And he always instilled in me this belief that if I worked hard enough and took every opportunity that I had, I could pursue any career I wanted and I could go to any school I wanted. So, I'm very grateful that because of the women before me, I had the ability to do that.
That's great to hear. Holly?
So I had a little bit of a different growing up experience. When I was young, it was expected that I would go to college, which I guess in my generation, not everybody had, but in my house and in the neighborhood I grew up with and my friends, it was expected everybody would go to school. I grew up in New York City where we had public college, so paying for college was not an issue and it was local. My mother did not expect I would go away to school. I mean, I think I shouldn't say didn't expect, she did not want me to go away to school. I was a girl, I was young, so the expectation was to go to the local college. And also there was an expectation that I would go into certain fields. As much as I was pushed that college was important, my mother also said, you should think about what you could do because you're going to be a mom. You should think about what you're going to do because you're going to be a wife. Become an accountant, become something where you could work part-time or you could take time off or have a family. There were certain jobs that were considered to be the right jobs for me as a woman. And like you said, when I was in high school, there were colleges I couldn't go to even if I wanted to. They just weren't open to women. So even though college was expected, it was a limited choice. And actually, the interesting thing, and I'm going to kind of push this over to you, Nancy, you didn't talk about your college experience, but you're close to my generation more than anybody here. We're really the same generation, and you're a lawyer, right? You went to law school.
I am
so
not a lawyer.
I thought you were. So you also went to college only. So if you could talk about like, I'm curious about you because did you get your do you have a graduate degree?
I do.
And did you do that straight out of school? Like, how is it for you growing up?
My parents said, I have 3 older brothers and they didn't have much money. So they said, well, the boys have to go and you just should, not be a secretary or something like that and not go to college. So I put myself through school and I would say I did it took me a long time to do that, but I have a master's degree in public administration from NYU. I went to Rutgers before that. I went to Middlesex first. So
you were more like me, not necessarily pushed to get that master's. That wasn't an expectation.
No, my parents would always say, why do you have to do something else? Why is it always one more thing?
So it's very different for our generation than for Erin or for Sasha, where they felt more doors were open for them as far as what they could do with their education or even what schools they could go to. We were much more limited in where we could go and, the expectations from our parents, I think, of what we should study.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the difficulties now is, when I went, even though I put myself through school and it was expensive, it's so much more unaffordable now. And so many people have a lot of debt, men and women both, and that's a real issue. So I think that's limiting our students going forward. And, there are, the state focused on other things like trades and apprenticeships and things like that. Not everybody has to go to college because there are a lot of great jobs in whether it's technology or plumbing and heating and all of the trades. So, I think we have to rethink our approach to college, especially when you look at people who are going to law school, medical school, dental school, some of them have literally $500,000 worth of debt. So while we went through a period where everybody focused on education, I think we have to, reassess and look at the job market and constantly be flexible because most people, everybody on this call basically said they started in one thing and went to something else. So you have to be flexible. And certainly with the pandemic, we see how important and what a big change that's had on all of our occupations and the way we work, the way we deal with our kids and go to school.
Definitely. I think you alluded to debt being a challenge that kind of both men and women face across the board. But for each of you guys, in pursuing your education and career, what specific challenges have you faced as a result of being a woman?
Well, for me, I think traditionally women didn't go into certain fields. Certainly women did not escalate. I had a bill when I was in the legislature about having women on corporate boards. And there are so few women that went to the CEO level that went into higher paying jobs. You talked about the pay disparity. When even if you're looking at doctors and lawyers, they make about 75% of what men make, even though they are working the same exact roles. So we still have a lot of limitations. You have a lot of issues. We passed a lot of bills during my tenure on equal pay, on gender disparity, on sick time, on paid family leave. It's very hard for women, obviously, biologically at this point so far, women are the ones that have children. So that's frequently been a difficulty because they are trying to figure out how to deal with daycare, how to go to work, what to do when you're pregnant. When we have a lot of jobs like fire and police, they never had women before. I was talking to a group of fire professionals that were women, and they were saying no one ever heard of a fire representative being pregnant. It just never happened before. So even looking at the equipment, when you're in certain jobs, the equipment's not made for women. When they have to pass a test, a physical test, if you are police, fire, other jobs that require that type of thing, you're trying to pass that test, yet the equipment is made 2 sizes too big, the gloves don't fit. How can you possibly handle technical equipment and pass an exam, a competency exam, handle guns or things like that when they're made for people of a different frame? So there's so many barriers that we still have to work on, all of those issues. when for medical residents, when they're in training, if they take time off for, let's say for maternity leave, they have to start that year, the entire year over again the next year. And it just is so difficult for them. And if they're on call, they're trying to be on call where they're working maybe 24 hours. And how do you do that when you're breastfeeding and things like that? So there's so many different aspects that we have to deal with.
Definitely. And I think Erin wanted also to jump in.
Yeah, so before I was at Bank of America, I actually worked at an investment firm. And there was a huge gender disparity. Like I would be in a meeting with 20 other men and I would be the only female. And I always wondered, like, what's going on? Why aren't there, more female members in this finance technology space? And it was just men, like my offshore meetings, my onshore meetings, my in-person meetings, they were all men. And when I joined Bank of America, I joined this group called WITNA, which is the Women in Technology and Operations Group, which I chair. And we do a lot of these evaluations and we look at numbers. And then what was really, really staggering to me was less than 5% of CEOs at S&P 500 companies are women. At least 1/4 of women experience some sort of sexual harassment in the workplace. Women earn about 20% less, like the numbers that you guys have been talking about, than men on average. And the only way we can really bridge that is by obviously having equal pay, equal treatment at workplace, equal representation on leadership teams, equal access to training and career building opportunities. So I feel like if we have those 3 to 4 things in place, we can narrow that gap between the female male in the workplace.
And some of the things, like the paternity leave, the family leave that's happened, we didn't really have that before, but that is good for men as well as women because it allows women to take time off, but Absolutely. It allows men to bond with their families, but then it's also more fairly distributes the work. And so that both, and you see companies now during the pandemic where both the husband and wife are able to take one after the other or simultaneous maternity leave or family leave to be able to deal with the children and all that. And it makes it much more friendly environment, and it kind of bridges that competition that we have where we, previously women would say to their partners, well, can you do me a favor and watch the kids? Can you do me a favor? The kid's sick today. Like, what the heck am I going to do? I have a meeting. It would basically be your problem and you'd have to figure it out where it wouldn't be their problem. And so that helps to really kind of change that perspective. And having women be in those leadership positions, whether it's the legislature, on corporate boards, or in leadership programs like Erum is talking about, that person can understand when somebody says, they have to leave because their child is sick. Well, when men are saying it, originally when men first did things taking care of the kids, people used to make fun of them. They would be like, oh, they're like the house husband. Oh, that's so funny. Right. And that was very discriminatory towards men, and it just perpetuated bad behavior. So a lot of that has been for the better for everybody.
One thing I will point out is that the company benefits are now reflecting the needs of all employees as well as families. So that is one place where, at least at Bank of America, that I see a significant change. Women get 16 weeks maternity leave, as well as men, they get 16 weeks paternity leave. So it's nice to have, the women can take their first leave, go back to work, and then the dad can take the second leave. So the kid is with a parent for a good amount of time. So that I think companies are leaning towards, which I really appreciate, which I'm sure all women appreciate.
Yeah. So I want to say 2 things. I think number one, by giving the men the maternity leave, like Nancy was saying, they bond with the children so they feel an equal responsibility. Where before, without making that early bond, I think it was not that same feeling of responsibility toward a child. But I also want to go back to something you said, Erin, about women in leadership positions and, being CEOs and things like that. Traditionally, those are positions that people are not holding in their 20s, 30s. It's more when you get later on in life, 40s, 50s, 60s, that you work your way up to those high positions. And I think the problem came from my generation. I know when I worked in the Garment Center, and I had a mentor, and he was wonderful. And he taught me, I did production management, but I was always a production assistant. I always worked under him because when he left, I was left at a job and I had experience. And instead of moving me up because he left, they brought a guy in to be over me who had less experience than me and paid him more money than me and gave him the job over me. And I didn't really realize, I think that was just the beginning of me realizing enough to make a fuss and say, this isn't fair. You know, I should get this management position. What I ended up doing was leaving that job and going back to be an assistant with the guy who had mentored me, because even though I couldn't move up, he gave me a $15,000 a year increase, which at that time was a phenomenal amount of money, because he knew that I was vastly underpaid because I was a woman and I was doing a job that was above what I was being paid for. But it was very difficult. And so because of that, in our generation, because women couldn't even move up at those lower levels, you didn't see the women have the ability to move up. So when you first started work, you didn't see the number of women in those higher up positions because they couldn't get into those middle positions that push them up into those higher ones. And I think more and more now, even though you're still seeing a problem getting into the very high positions, women are making real strides in those middle management positions, which will make it work its way up to seeing those real leadership roles that women will have. But it's a very, I feel like it's such a different climate than in the 1970s, 1980s, early 1980s, when late 70s, early 80s, when I was working. And we kind of, you had to be really at the forefront and very strong to really, really push and say what's being done to me is not fair. And I know for me, part of it was I always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, at least for the short term. So I think I didn't make as much of a fuss because I knew this was not a permanent career, but I think that hurt women who came after me. Because even if it wasn't permanent, looking back, I realized I probably should have made more of a fuss about what was being done to me, because the woman who took the job after me would then have to suffer the same fate I did. So it was a learning experience for us. But I think in your generation and Sasha's generation, you're going to start to see more and more working our way up the ladder until maybe by the time Sasha is of the age to be a CEO, it'll be completely acceptable, for women and equal, hopefully.
Well, I think it's important for women to prepare themselves and to collect data on what they're doing in their job so that when they go for a raise, they can stick to the facts and create documentation that says, this is what I've been doing, and have some numbers that say, well, I increased productivity by this much. I'm responsible for this much money in the budget, or those type of things, and use those facts. So when they get to an opportunity to promote themselves and to ask for a raise, that they have the data to back that up. Because many times, women were looked down upon, or people figured, well, they weren't the primary breadwinner, so why did they just didn't deserve that. Men had to support the family, so why should they not get paid? In fact, there's an article that I pulled out that was a Microsoft CEO that he had given advice, like nationally, that for women, it should just be the karma alone of doing a good job should be enough, and they should never ask for a raise. And then, in fact, if they asked for a raise, he would think less of them. And then later on, years later, he retracted that and said, that was the worst advice he ever gave. So, and I think that's probably accurate, but, we do have to, women, prepare for that, and to kind of change the focus of when women make an issue about something. Women, they have the B word, that people say that, where men, they just accept that they're going to have an issue about something. If they complain about something and they move on to something else, they just say it, they move on, and they do other things. So women have to, be prepared and not to feel guilty about it. We tend to, perseverate over it, think about it, rather than just creating the facts and moving on. Preparing accordingly with the proper education, the proper tools, and mentoring. I think, Holly, you said that you had a mentor, and that's so important. If you can find a mentor, man or woman, to help you. And we ourselves have that obligation for the women behind us to help them to move forward, to move up the ladder, to get appointments. The corporate board issue, many of the corporate boards, the higher level boards are paying boards, and it's not easy to get on a board. So, the bill that I had was passed in California. Actually, they passed a resolution that said every corporate board over a certain size had to have at least one woman. And it was passed as a suggestion, not as a mandate, and not one single company took that up and put a woman on their board. So then they went and passed it as a law. And when they had, I think, a 2-year implementation period, and at first no company was really adding women, but when it got close to the deadline, all of a sudden they all started doing it, and the world did not come to an end. That everything was fine. A lot of people say that women have 70% of the purchase power. So having them on their board, they have less fraud, less problems with the company, and they actually perform better. So, but it's preparing women. There actually are a lot of professional women's groups that are working with women to prepare them and help them to get into those high-level corporate CEO positions, high-level corporate boards.
And a lot of them are nonprofits. So like if you want to be able to donate them or, give your time and mentor these girls or these emerging women that are coming into this workplace, I think that's another way to kind of bridge that gap.
Definitely. A lot of great points. I want to bring Sasha into the mix. Sasha, you mentioned some of the work you do down in Washington, D.C., specifically with the Small Business Administration and small businesses owned by women. So what are some of the challenges you worked on or you saw while you were working down in DC that, women were facing when it came to small business ownership?
I think the biggest challenge that I noticed, at least when I was there, is not necessarily the inability to build a business or the inability to maintain their business. It was just the lack of knowledge of the resources available. So, like the government has business centers across the country with specific offices to help women actually, learn skills that would help them in their whatever field that they're in. So like, again, I didn't notice really anyone having a difficult time because of the fact that they were women, but it was simply not knowing where they could find resources that they needed.
Well, on that note, I will say that Rutgers has a program for a small business development, and they have such great programming. It's free programming, and they had recently they did a program on doing business with India, and they had like high-level people from India there to help people in New Jersey create opportunities back and forth. One of the issues is funding and being able to find for minorities and women companies that will fund them, and to be able to do that securely and not lose your shirt over it. And this administration in New Jersey has really worked hard on doing that. There is as I said, the Women Minority Small Business Procurement Board. They are actually working on a program. In New York, there was a program where they did a set aside of state and state bidding and purchasing, and that's huge amounts of money, but they set aside 30% for those protected classes, and New Jersey is moving in that way too. So there are lots of resources that the state and the local chambers and things like that have that are helping women, and I think we're doing a lot better. A lot of our business growth is with small businesses, and the women are doing well, but that ability to fundraise is important. We do have women now, minority women and women that are doing that assistance with investing and helping people to move forward.
That's really great to hear. And, raising visibility about resources is definitely something that we can do as family and communities. And some of you have inadvertently answered the questions I already had, so which is really great. But the next question I wanted to ask each of you is, we talked a little bit about what corporations themselves, as well as the government, can do to kind of, legislate the problem or implement these sort of programs. But what do each of you think that families and communities can do to support women when it comes to, entering the workforce or, pursuing higher education? Erum?
So I would say just sharing all roles, right? All roles, whether it's finance, whether it's chores in the house, from A to Z. Like instead of it being a soccer mom, it could be a soccer dad, right? Instead of one person making the meals, it could be split. One day mom can make meals, Tuesday dad can make meals. So I think just like that support system, and it really takes a village, right? So it's hard for women to like work and then do all the home duties that are required of like the moms should be doing. So I think just splitting these responsibilities and being more understanding about everything, I think that's how we can reduce this gap of this gender disparity in the workplace and as well as in the communities.
I think being able to I just want to say, I think being able to accept that help from other people is important too.
And I think that by the children seeing that in the house, it makes the girls in the house feel more comfortable about going to career positions, and teaches the sons in the house that this is how they have to act. Because, you know, in my husband's generation, my husband's been very good about that, but not everybody was raised that way, that the man should be doing a lot of the things in the house. I also think that one of the things that, like, because it takes a village, is when in the younger grades, you know, you're supposed to bring your parent to work to talk about their career. It's very important that women take the time out to go into these grade schools, talk about their careers, let these young women know that they have these professional careers, that they have these options, that not just to see women as school teachers or mommy at home, or maybe the nurse at the doctor's office, but to understand that they have friends and, you know, people in the community who have positions like Erum's or positions like Nancy's, and learn at an early age that these options are open to women who have families, that it's not a choice. You know, one time when women thought it was a choice, career or family, that was a big saying when we were young, you know, you have to pick. But to see at a young age these women doing this in school on career days, I think is a big help to letting these girls understand that these futures are open to them.
I think there was a period that there was a lot of guilt over that. And so the women that stayed home, they had guilt about staying home, that they weren't working. And then they would punish the women that were working and vice versa. And, you know, we had to get over that and sort of accept each other and be able to help each other rather than, you know.
That was definitely in my generation. I mean, I choose to stay. I worked for 12 years. I mean, I had a career in the garment center. And then when my son was born, I decided I was going to be a stay-at-home mom at least until my two children were at school. And, you know, there were friends of mine who couldn't understand how I could give up my career. And I had friends how I couldn't understand how they could give up being with their children when they were young. And
sometimes it's a stigma. Like, why is there a gap in your resume? So you're working, you took a 4 or 5 year gap, and now you're working again. And so sometimes I feel like men aren't as understanding that, yeah, I chose to be with my child, you know. And another mentality like, oh, I can do it all. I think that's got to go out the door. You have to be using resources out. You have to outsource certain things. Like if cleaning is becoming an issue in the house, then you outsource and you get cleaning ladies. Like if food is becoming an issue, like you have to learn to outsource and delegate, because I think us as women and as moms, we have a lot of mom guilt. And I think to kind of get rid of that, you have to learn how to like outsource some of the things that you're struggling with. And it's okay if you're struggling with it. That's why you should outsource.
I had definitely a problem with that when I decided to go back to work, with that gap. You know, you stayed home for these years. And I became a manager in a dental office because I went to work for my cousin. And my cousin knew I stayed home and he had no problem with the gap. He understood it. And he knew what I was capable of because he knew me. So I was able to go into almost a management again. But I think if it hadn't been for him, I would have had to. I know friends who stayed home and had to start like, you know, in a job of a college graduate, even if they had 10, 15 years experience because of that gap, the way men looked at that gap. Well, you stayed home, now you don't know anything, you can't do anything. You're a stay-at-home mom. You know, no, I was a professional woman for 10, 12, 15 years. I have all that experience. It didn't go away, you know, when I had a baby. I didn't forget everything in 6 years, but there's definitely, and that stigma is a problem for women who want to make that choice, even to take a small, I think that problem still exists for women who want to take a break in a career.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's still a problem.
One of the things about the pandemic is that people have been saying that the media has been saying that it has fallen heavily on women, and a lot of women had to backpedal in their careers because they had to stay home. And when the kids were now at home and doing virtual class and all that, they were the ones that ended up getting the short end of the stick and having to give up their job or give up their financial resources and stay home.
Because more of the stay-at-home
we'll see what happens going forward, if they'll be able to pick back up or not from that.
That's what Erin was saying, that more of the burden falls on the women. So Sasha, I'm curious to ask you how you're listening to some of what's kind of ahead of you. Did you realize any of this? Was this like what you're expecting, or?
I mean, yeah, I definitely have thought about, when I move up and when I am in a different season of my life and want a family. But I don't think that that's ever like stopped me from pursuing what I want to pursue. And I think that's really important, at least for me. I don't know if it's just me being naive, but I think it's really important to coming from women like you who have experience in the workplace, to really encourage younger girls, to not feel like they're victims to the system, and instead, push through and pursue and work hard, and no matter what, continue. Because I think now there's just a lot of negativity about, oh, well, we have all of these barriers, but sorry, excuse me. But, there is a way around them and over them if we need to go over them, So yeah, I think that's really important.
One of the things that I was reading about in preparation for today was the media and the media's interpretation. And, you saw it with the boat issue going through the Suez Canal, right? What was the first thing they said about that, right? Was the captain was a woman. So it's like, okay, well, no wonder we had this problem. The captain was a woman. And that when they say that when people talk about company issues, the reporting is 70% more often will be derogatory for women, that they're having problems in the company. It's because the CEO is a woman, where it never comes up if they're men. And, we have to think about that. Even when you look at the media that is put out, when you look at the sports for women, right? The women's soccer group was like, they were earning much more money than the men's soccer group when they went to the Olympics, but yet they were getting a huge amount of coverage, but yet they had no financial resources. They were raising their own money, making a lot less. So I started doing a little survey myself of looking at the paper and seeing how many times the newspaper reports women's sports at the college or professional level. And it's even those kind of things where it's just not reported, and we are second shift all the time. So there's so many ways we can promote that by, supporting those groups, supporting women candidates financially, where women tend to not be big donors when it comes to supporting them. It's very hard to raise money. You're trying to work and take care of your kids, and then you have to raise money. It's very hard to do that as a candidate for office. So the way we can help that is everybody can do that by supporting candidates like that, supporting the women's sports. I was at a thing where the Rutgers women's soccer, they were making little necklaces to raise money so that they can have training and nutritional counseling and things like that. The athletic trainers, where the men weren't doing that. They were just the college was just providing it. And I was like, why is it? I met a cardiologist, a woman cardiologist, who was making these little Fearless Girls necklaces and selling them because the women on the team didn't have enough money to even go to events and when I'm talking about going to events, I'm talking about competitions and things like that. So there's lots of things that we have to look at, that we have to set the expectation that we want to have equal representation on those things.
I want to clarify something you said, Nancy. When you said the women make more money, the women don't make more money. Women's soccer earns more money.
They were earning money, yes.
But the women make less money than the men, even though the women's soccer earns more money than the men's soccer. They make less money. So I just want to make sure everybody understood that that's what, when you said they make more money, the women don't make more money, the sport makes more money.
You're right.
And so that makes it even more unfair, because they're using women's soccer money almost to help the men, and they're not using it fairly with the women. And it's kind of sad that we talked about women's lib when I was young, and 40 years later, we're having the exact same discussions. And what's listening to Sasha, who's talking about possibly facing the same problems and the same questions and the same choices that I looked at 40 years ago. You know, you would think 40 years later, a lot of those things would be more settled and answered and easier for someone of Sasha's generation. So it's kind of, I don't know, I guess disturbing, Sasha, to hear you talking about having the same dilemmas and thoughts. And
yeah, I mean, I want to look at the positive and, you know, see how far we've come in the last few decades. And I found some statistics that I thought were really interesting. And that was that at the end of 2019, women held a majority of jobs in the US. So we held 50.4% of jobs. And we surpassed men in payrolls by 109,000, which, I mean, it's kind of surprising. And then also from 1950 to now, women in the US labor force has increased by almost 300%. So, you know, looking at it from that perspective, I mean, I'm pretty hopeful, and I think that that's pretty amazing.
I think it's definitely improving. It's definitely improving. We're definitely heading in the right direction.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I think so. Again, you guys have alluded to some of this before, but for our final question, what advice would each of you give to young women growing up now as it relates to pursuing higher education in their careers? So I'll give you guys a moment to think about this, but you know, each of you obviously have had varied experiences and kind of different diverse backgrounds. So what's one specific piece of advice that you could maybe think back about your own career, your own time in you know, pursuing education that you would pass on or convey to young women who, you know, as you pointed out, might be facing even the same challenges that each of you did? And Sasha, you know, what would you maybe say to your peers at Rutgers University about, again, obviously you've had your own accomplishments and everything. So we'll go one by one here. Whoever wants to start off, and then if you guys would want to, you know, give that one piece of advice. Erin, go for it.
Sure. I would say never let your gender be the deciding factor on your education, on your career, on any aspect in life, because even if you choose to get married one day, everything is done together. You know, it's a partnership. It's not a dictatorship at all, right? So your husband's career is just as important as yours. If you choose to be with your daughter or son or your child for the first 4 or 5 years, that should be your decision based on because you want to be able to do that, not because you think that how will society look at me like that. Like in certain Asian cultures, right? Like they recommend or they want the mom to be with the kids. So like, don't let gender be a deciding factor on your education or your career. Marriages are a partnership, and I feel like all roles now have become equal, right? So if one person can do the chores, the other person can do the chores. So like, just never let gender be like a deciding factor in anything.
I'll go next. I think that you should do whatever you feel passionate about and whatever makes you happy. I think that's the most important thing to decide. And like Erin said, that has nothing to do with gender. You have to do what makes you happy. And you have to do that, whether that's staying home with your children, whether that's pursuing a career, and whatever career that is. I think the world is more open than it was when I was young. And, you know, if I had really, I think now fought for it, I could have gone back. Even if I had a setback after staying home those years, I could have gone back to a career. Part of my problem was what I did was outsourced and the career I had was gone. So it was kind of starting over. But I think even if you have that setback, you know, you have that opportunity to go back in and build back up again. Like there's a lot of working years in your life. So a few years setback is worth the fight if that's what it takes. So I don't think any of those should affect your choices. I think you just need to do what makes you happy and what you feel passionate about. And if you do that, the rest falls into place. And like Erin said, make sure you marry a partner, not a husband.
Very well said. Well, you know, I think we should talk a little bit about the cultural differences. Like some people think that some cultures do it a certain way and other cultures don't. I think that that's really changed. Many times I went to speak to very diverse groups, and the women there would say, well, you know, in America, like we're doing things a certain way, when I really found that in other cultures, women became doctors and scientists and lawyers before it happened here. So I think we shouldn't let those thoughts hold us back, and we should assume that, you know, there's certain innate things that we're all trying to do. We're all trying to have good jobs and run a good business and take care of our family and do all those things. I think that crosses across all cultures. And I think it's important to not just have that college preparation, but to do an internship. Like I know, Nikki, you worked in my office at one point, and I think Sasha was saying the things that she's been volunteering for, to volunteer on other things, whether it's the student council or, the college judicial board, or maybe an advisory, or have a college job on campus where you're doing different things, work in an office, volunteer for somebody, mentor. I've had through my legislative office so many great students that have come in and gone on to so many different things, and they're so stellar. But when you do those kind of things, and even if you do it at work, if you're finished with school and you find that mentor, find that way to make yourself stand out, you'll really enjoy it more, and it will help you to succeed.
I obviously don't have too much experience professionally, but something I might, tell my peers is I never want to be the victim, even if, there is something that's in my way. I'm going to go through it if I have to. And, I've had the privilege of being mentored by some successful, intelligent, amazing women who, no matter what stood in their way, persevered and were successful in their field. So I think that's just a possibility for everyone, with enough hard work and a good work ethic, and just perseverance.
And I just want to add one last thing. I guess Erin kind of touched on it. Just remember, your life is your choice. No guilt about whatever your choices are. Whatever career path you take, whatever choices you make, it's your life. So no guilt. That's a big piece of advice I would give to people.
Definitely. And I think that, Erin, do you want to pitch in one more thing?
Oh, no. I was just good.
Okay. Well, I think that was a great question to end on. Great advice there, not only just for young women, but, people, all people, I think. That's really, really great. So I just want to give a quick hand to our panelists. I think you guys did a wonderful job. I know I enjoyed listening to the entire conversation. The past 45 minutes have just flown by. I will just ask Dovey, did we get any questions on Facebook?
We got actually one from Paula.
Oh, great. You want to go ahead and ask?
Yes. So I'll just leave it an open question. Anybody who has the answer can please raise your hand. So does NJ stack up? How does New Jersey stack up with other states with respect to the percentage of women who hold cabinet level state jobs?
Oh, the governor has done an amazing job with that. We have the lieutenant governor is a woman. We have the treasurer is a woman, which is pretty unusual. I don't know that if we've had another woman treasurer, I'm not aware of it. A lot of his cabinet commissioner of health is a woman. A lot of his cabinet level people were not only women, but minorities. So he's really done a great job.
Another thing that I wanted to end with.
By the way, we should ask Dovey, since she's home with 2 little kids, what thought she has on this.
So let me tell you something about my education background too. I graduated from Rutgers University with a bachelor's of computer science and minor in religion. And after that, so I was an interior designer and worked with my parents' business and to furniture and everything. And then after I got married, of course, I took a step back. And once I had my kid, all my friends, everybody like in my family too, sometimes they would leave the kids to a daycare. I wasn't ready for that. So I was one of those moms. I left my work and everything. And I was like, okay, even having a IT background and everything, I went to a daycare and I was like, okay, I'm going to be an assistant over there. I joined in because I didn't want to leave my son there. He was my firstborn. And then I was there. I enjoyed everything. And later on, guess what? I was there for like almost 4 or 5 years. And then I ended up being a head teacher in one of the 4-year-old classes. So that was fun. And then after my son went to kindergarten, I was still there for a year because they were like, don't go and everything. So I was still there. And then, But then I had to make a move, go back to my career and everything, which I did. Now that I have my newborn, she's 7 months old already. It's a long gap again because my first one is 9-year-old. I don't know how it's gonna happen, but I'm happy. Not happy, but like because my husband's home, it's good. I work full time from home, online everything. Everything is online. My husband works from home, online everything. Right now, also he was peeking and he's like, "Okay, she's calling you. She needs you." So she's like, a little bit thing. But yes, I would definitely say partnership is something we really need, and I'm glad. Crossed my fingers. Right now, my husband is really pitching in everything. I get work calls and I'm like, okay, here you go, hold her. I gotta go on the phone. Okay, hold her. I gotta do this. There's a middle of something like a diaper change or whatever. He's doing everything, cooking and everything. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't say thanks to COVID, but thanks to staying at home with my husband, he is cooking also now. So that's a really good thing.
Well, you have to be adaptable. That's the important thing.
Yes.
Well, one thing that I wanted to add was the Whitno group that I'm part of at Bank of America. Our business sponsor is actually a male. So I know we're talking about gender inequality or gender disparity. We recognize it as women, but if men recognize it, that's a huge thing for us because it really helps us kind of identify these issues and give us that support that's actually needed to move forward. So I feel like that support from our male counterparts and just males in general, it's very important.
I think that's true because it can't be fixed if they don't see that there's a problem.
Correct.
And I think things like the governor and even the president now, who puts so many women in their cabinets and in these big positions, is a big step in the right direction. Correct. To show leaders that this is what we could do. And when Nancy, you were talking about other countries, about people, women doctors and women leaders, Germany, Israel, I mean, so many Canada, well, so many countries, Australia, right? Or New Zealand. So many countries have had women leaders.
Pakistan's
so
first,
behind in that also.
I think Pakistan's prime minister in the 1990s was a female too.
Right.
People think sometimes that maybe we're advanced in the US. What's not true, where the other countries have done that a long time ago.
Right. And here there's so much talk about a woman president. Like other countries must think we're crazy. It's just.
But, I think we should touch on, the fact that families are changing so dramatically now. We have a lot of same-sex couples. We have differences in gender, transgender, lots of changes. And so a lot of these family changes and the work changes and work policies are really going to help that whole change. And it's something that, really is contributes to everybody accepting everybody and trying to work together as a community.
I just want to add really quickly, just on the topic of having the support from men. I actually learned from my boss back in DC. She said that something that really helped her out was having a male mentor, because men dominate politics and government. So she said that having that male mentor really elevated her to the next level. And from that, she was able to move up in her career. And now she's extremely successful. So, I think having that support from men who, in whatever field you're in, if they're the dominant gender in that field, having that support is really, really important.
So that's I'm going to end with for all the men to join us on the team and work together with us.
I'm going to end with an interesting comment. The man that mentored me in the garment center, even though I was never able to move up into the position, I never blamed him because I wasn't going to take his place. He was the production manager, and he left me at places hoping that I would be able to move up there. The problem was they didn't do it. But he had a very interesting comment when he hired me. He said he prefers to hire women over men because women work because they want to and men work because they have to. So he felt if he hired a woman, he would have someone who wanted to be there and would really do a good job. And I thought that was a
I think that is the perfect note to end on, actually. Very optimistic, a comment that I've never heard before. So definitely going to stick with me. We are running up on the hour here. So again, I want to thank you guys all for giving us your time, spending time with us this evening, especially our panelists to be here and, have this wonderful conversation.
On behalf of East Brunswick Human Relations Council, I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.